Picture this. A bride spends months planning her dream wedding. Her sister, a professional pastry chef, spends weeks perfecting a custom red velvet cake just for her. The ceremony goes perfectly. The couple cuts the cake, feeds each other a bite, and steps away for 10 minutes of photos. When they come back, the entire cake is gone. Every last crumb. And sitting at a table in the back is the sister-in-law with her 6 children, each one polishing off a giant slice. When the bride confronts her, she does not apologize. She says the bride should be grateful they came at all. She calls the wedding meaningless. And then she storms out with frosting dripping down the back of her neck after another sister throws a slice of sheet cake at her head. This is the story of a woman who learned that some people will take everything you give them and still find a way to blame you for not giving enough.
My wedding was never supposed to be fancy. That was the first thing I told anyone who asked about the plans. I said it so often that it became a kind of mantra, a shield against the expectations that seemed to pile up the moment I announced my engagement. Family members wanted to know about the venue. Coworkers asked about the dress. Friends sent me links to Pinterest boards filled with centerpieces I could not afford and floral arrangements I did not want. Every time someone asked, I smiled and said the same thing. Nothing fancy. Just us. Just the people we love. Just a good day. But deep down, I cared more than I let on. I cared about the way the wildflowers looked in the mason jars my sister had spent an afternoon arranging. I cared about the playlist my husband and I had built together, song by song, late at night when we should have been sleeping. I cared about the cake. God, I cared about that cake more than I realized until it was gone. Elena had been my best friend since college. We met in a dormitory kitchen at 2 a.m, both of us unable to sleep, both of us reaching for the same box of instant macaroni. She had gone on to become a head pastry chef at one of the most respected restaurants in the city, a place where reservations booked out months in advance and people flew in from other states just to taste her desserts. When I asked her if she would make my wedding cake, she cried. She told me it would be the greatest honor of her career, and I knew she meant it. She spent weeks perfecting the recipe. Red velvet had always been my favorite, and she tested 4 different versions before settling on the final one. She sent me samples in tiny takeout containers with handwritten notes attached. This one has a touch more vanilla. This one uses buttermilk instead of regular milk. Tell me which one makes you feel something. I told her the third one made me feel everything, and she laughed and said that was the one. The week before the wedding, I drove to her restaurant to pick up some paperwork for the venue, and she pulled me into the kitchen to show me the final product. It was beautiful. A single tier, perfectly proportioned, covered in buttercream so smooth it looked like silk. She had decorated it with fresh flowers that matched my bouquet, pale pink and white blooms arranged in a gentle cascade down one side. I stood there in my jeans and flower-dusted sweatshirt, staring at this cake that she had made with her own hands, and I felt tears well up in my eyes. She pretended not to notice and handed me a towel to wipe my face. The only person who seemed immune to the joy of the preparations was Carol. My sister-in-law had a way of casting a shadow over everything without even trying. She showed up to events late and left early, always with some excuse about the kids, always making sure everyone knew how difficult her life was compared to ours. I tried to have sympathy for her. 6 children was a lot. I could not imagine the exhaustion, the constant noise, the never-ending demands. But somewhere along the way, her exhaustion had curdled into resentment, and she took it out on everyone around her. I remembered a Thanksgiving dinner 2 years before the wedding. Carol had arrived with her children in tow, all of them cranky from the long drive. She had not brought anything to share, not even a bottle of wine, and when my mother asked her if she could help with the dishes, Carol laughed and said she had done enough just by getting everyone out the door. My mother said nothing, just smiled and turned back to the stove. But I saw the way her shoulders slumped, the way she quietly added more soap to the sink and started scrubbing alone. I wanted to say something. I wanted to defend my mother. But I told myself it was not worth the fight. That was the pattern. Carol would say or do something thoughtless, and everyone else would absorb the impact in silence. We told ourselves we were keeping the peace. We told ourselves it was better than causing a scene. We told ourselves so many things, and none of them were true. The truth was that we were afraid of her. Afraid of her anger. Afraid of the way she could twist a conversation until you were the one apologizing. Afraid of being the next target. On the morning of my wedding, I woke up earlier than anyone else. The sun was just starting to rise, casting a soft orange glow through the curtains of the room where I had spent the night. I lay there for a long time, listening to the sound of birds outside and the distant hum of a lawnmower somewhere down the street. I thought about my husband, about the life we were about to start, about all the small moments that had led us to this day. I thought about my father walking me down the aisle and my mother crying before I even reached the altar. I thought about Elena and the cake sitting in the venue kitchen, waiting for us. I did not think about Carol. Not once. And that should have been my first clue that something was about to go wrong. Because on a day when everything is supposed to be perfect, the universe has a way of reminding you that you are not in control. The ceremony was everything I had hoped for. My husband looked at me like I was the only person in the world, and I felt the same way about him. Our voices shook as we said our vows, and neither of us cared. The officiant was an old friend from college who told a story about the first time he saw us together, how he knew we would end up here. My mother cried. My father pretended not to. Even the weather cooperated, which in our part of the country felt like a minor miracle. After the ceremony, we did the cake cutting. It was quick and lighthearted, everyone clapping as my husband and I pressed our hands together over the knife and sawed through the bottom layer. We fed each other a tiny bite, posed for the photographer, and then the plan was to come back for the real thing after we finished the last round of photos before sunset. I remember looking at the cake as we walked away, that beautiful tower of red velvet and buttercream sitting untouched on its pedestal. I felt a pang of reluctance, a small voice in the back of my head telling me to stay, to take just one more slice, to claim what was mine before someone else did. But I ignored it. The light was perfect, golden hour stretching across the field behind the venue, and our photographer was waving us over with an urgency that brooked no argument. 10 minutes. That was all we were gone. 10 minutes of posing in the fading light, laughing as my husband tried to dip me without dropping me, feeling the cool evening air settle over my bare shoulders. 10 minutes of happiness, pure and unguarded. And in those 10 minutes, Carol destroyed the one thing I had been looking forward to more than almost anything else. When we came back, the cake table was empty. Not just missing a few slices, completely bare. The pedestal stood there like a monument to everything that had been taken from us, stripped of its flowers, its frosting, its reason for existing. For a long moment, I did not understand what I was seeing. My brain refused to process it. I looked at the table, then at the guests, then back at the table, waiting for someone to tell me there had been a mistake. And then I saw Carol. She was sitting at a table near the back of the venue, her 6 children scattered around her like ducklings following a mother hen. Each one of them had a plate in front of them piled high with red velvet cake. The entire cake had been divided into 7 portions, giant slabs of buttercream and crumbs spread across the table like a battlefield after a massacre. Carol was eating hers with her fingers, licking frosting off her thumb, laughing at something her oldest daughter had said. She looked utterly at peace. She looked like she belonged there. I walked over slowly. My legs felt heavy, and my heart was pounding in my chest. My husband followed close behind, and I could feel the tension radiating off him before he even spoke. I tried to keep my voice steady. I asked Carol if she had taken all the cake, because we had not even had any yet. She looked up at me with an expression of genuine confusion, like I had asked her a question in a foreign language. She said she had seen us cut the cake earlier, so she assumed it was time to eat it. I explained that we had only done the ceremonial cut. I explained that the cake was supposed to wait for us. I explained that we had been looking forward to sharing that moment together, that Elena had spent weeks making it, that it was not just cake, it was a memory we would never get back. I said all of this calmly, quietly, trying not to let the tremor in my voice betray how I really felt. Carol waved her hand dismissively and said her kids were hungry. She gestured at the catered food and the sheet cake on the other side of the venue and said her children were not eating that. I pointed out that she could have asked someone to get them food from the buffet. I pointed out that she could have brought snacks. I pointed out that none of this would have happened if she had just waited 10 more minutes. She told me I should be grateful they came at all. She asked me if I knew how hard it was to get 6 kids out the door for meaningless little things like this. Meaningless. The word hit me like a slap. I felt something crack inside my chest, a hairline fracture in the composure I had been maintaining for years. All those holidays where I had bitten my tongue. All those family dinners where I had smiled through her passive-aggressive comments. All those moments I had sacrificed on the altar of keeping the peace. They came rushing back in a single wave, and I realized that I had been wrong the entire time. Keeping the peace did not work. It never worked. It only delayed the explosion and made the damage worse when it finally came. My husband stepped forward. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. He looked at Carol with a calm that was somehow more terrifying than anger, and he told her she needed to leave. Carol laughed at first, thinking he was joking. When she realized he was not, her face shifted. The confusion turned into indignation, and the indignation turned into rage. She started yelling. She said we were making a big deal out of nothing. She said cake was just cake. She said we were being selfish and childish, that we were ruining her children's evening because of our egos. Her kids were looking around with wide eyes, their forks frozen mid-bite, unsure of what was happening. I felt a surge of pity for them. They had not asked for any of this. They were just children, and their mother had turned them into weapons without their consent. And then Elena appeared. She had been in the kitchen, packing up her tools, when the commotion reached her. She came out still wearing her apron, her hands dusted with flour, and she saw the empty pedestal before she saw Carol. I watched her face cycle through confusion, disbelief, and finally a cold, focused rage that I had never seen on her before. She walked over to the table where the remnants of her work still sat, and she picked up an empty plate with a smear of buttercream on it. She held it in her hands like she was holding a piece of something broken. She asked Carol who she thought she was. She told Carol that she had spent 30 hours on that cake, that she had tested the recipe 4 times, that she had driven it to the venue herself handling it like it was made of glass, because it was made of love. She told Carol that she had no right. My sister arrived at the same time, drawn by the noise. She was barely 5 feet tall and had never been afraid of anything in her life. She stood next to Elena, the two of them forming a wall of fury that made Carol shrink back in her chair. My sister demanded to know what kind of person steals a bride's wedding cake. Carol tried to defend herself, but every word she said made it worse. She claimed she had not stolen anything because the cake was meant to be eaten. She claimed we were overreacting because we had sheet cake. She claimed she was the real victim here because we were yelling at her in front of her children. The entire venue had gone quiet. The music had stopped. Guests were staring. Someone had pulled out their phone. And Carol sat there, trapped in the spotlight of her own entitlement, with nowhere to hide. She turned beet red and huffed that she would never come to one of us people weddings again. The way she said us people made it clear exactly what she meant. It was not about the cake anymore. It had never been about the cake. It was about who she thought she was and who she thought we were. She grabbed her children, knocking over chairs and spilling plates, and started marching toward the parking lot. My sister grabbed a slice of sheet cake from the nearest table. It was a perfect throw, the kind of toss that would have made her high school softball coach proud. The cake hit Carol right in the back of the head, frosting exploding across her hair and dripping down the back of her neck. Carol did not turn around. She just kept walking, leaning forward at an awkward angle to keep the mess from running down her collar. Her children followed her in a confused line, glancing back at us with expressions I still cannot forget. The silence lasted 1 second. Then the venue erupted. People were clapping. Someone whistled. My best friend from work came over and hugged me so hard I thought my ribs would crack. My husband's uncle, who had barely spoken to me all night, walked up and said that was the best wedding he had ever been to. Even the caterer, a stoic man who had seen every kind of wedding disaster, cracked a smile. I stood there in the middle of it all, feeling the laughter ripple through the crowd, feeling the tension drain out of my body. I looked at my sister, who was still holding a fistful of frosting with a grin on her face. I looked at Elena, who was already on the phone with someone, probably telling them about the cake she would need to make for a reshooting of the moment we never got. I looked at my husband, who was watching me with an expression that said everything we did not need to say out loud. He took my hand and led me to the dance floor. The music started again, something slow and familiar. He held me close and told me that none of it mattered, that the only thing that mattered was that we were married and that we were happy. I wanted to believe him. Part of me did. But another part of me was still standing in front of that empty pedestal, feeling the weight of something I would never get back. The rest of the night was beautiful. We ate sheet cake. We danced until our feet hurt. We stayed up late with our closest friends, drinking wine and rehashing the drama until it became a joke instead of a wound. My mother pulled me aside at one point and told me she was proud of me for standing my ground. I told her I had not done anything, that it was my sister who threw the cake, and she laughed and said that was not what she meant. The next morning, I woke up in our hotel room with my wedding dress hanging on the back of the door and the smell of frosting still lingering in my hair. My husband was still asleep, and I lay there in the quiet, replaying everything that had happened. I thought about Carol walking to her car with cake dripping down her neck. I thought about the look on her face when she realized no one was on her side. I thought about all the years I had spent accommodating her, excusing her, making myself smaller so she could feel bigger. And I realized that I did not have to do that anymore. A week later, I received a text from an unknown number. It was Carol's oldest daughter, a 14-year-old girl who had always seemed more mature than her mother. She apologized for what had happened. She said she was sorry that we did not get to have any of our own cake. She said she wished things had been different. I thanked her and told her that none of it was her fault. I asked her how she was doing, and she said she was okay, that she was used to her mother's behavior by now. That broke my heart in a way the missing cake never could. A few days after that, I ran into my husband's cousin at the grocery store. She pulled me aside between the produce section and the dairy aisle and asked me in a hushed voice if the story about the cake was true. I told her it was. She started laughing so hard that she had to lean against a display of oranges to steady herself. She said Carol had been telling the family that I had overreacted and that my sister had assaulted her for no reason. She said no one believed Carol, that the story had spread too fast and too far, and that the image of her walking out with frosting in her hair was too good for anyone to forget. Word spread through the family like wildfire. Within 2 weeks, Carol had become a cautionary tale rather than a figure of authority. She tried to spin the narrative, posting vague messages on social media about toxic family members and people who did not appreciate her sacrifices. But every time she posted, someone would comment asking about the cake. Someone would tag my sister. Someone would share the story, and the laughter would start all over again. Elena came over the following weekend with a new cake. It was not a wedding cake this time. It was a small red velvet layer cake, just enough for me and my husband, decorated with the same pale pink flowers she had used before. She set it on my kitchen counter and said she wanted us to have the moment we were supposed to have. I cut 2 slices, and my husband and I sat at our small dining table, eating in silence. It was the best cake I had ever tasted. My husband's mother called me about a month after the wedding. She had never been the type to meddle, and she sounded uncomfortable as she asked me if I thought Carol would ever be invited to future family events. I told her honestly that I did not know. I said I was not ready to make that decision yet. She said she understood, and I believed her. Carol never apologized to me directly. She sent a message through my husband, a vague acknowledgement that things had gotten out of hand, but she framed it as a mutual misunderstanding rather than an admission of fault. She said she hoped we could move past it for the sake of the family. I did not respond.
Looking back at this story, there are a few things worth taking away. First, entitlement does not care about occasion. The sister-in-law genuinely believed her children's hunger justified taking something that did not belong to her, even on a day that was not about her. She did not see a wedding cake. She saw an opportunity, and she took it. Second, the people who love you will show up when it matters. The sister who spent weeks on that cake. The other sister who threw it without a second's hesitation. The husband who stood calmly beside his wife instead of escalating. The bride did not have to fight alone because she had built a life surrounded by people who had her back. And third, some people will never admit they were wrong. The sister-in-law never apologized directly. She sent a vague message through her husband, calling it a mutual misunderstanding. She spent weeks trying to spin the story to make herself the victim, but the family had seen what happened. The image of her walking out with cake dripping down her neck was too clear for anyone to forget. In the end, the bride moved on. She ate sheet cake on her wedding night and danced until her feet hurt. Her sister Elena brought her a replacement cake the following weekend. Her husband held her hand and told her it was okay to let go. And the sister-in-law faded into the background, a cautionary tale retold at every family gathering, a reminder that some people will take everything you offer and still find a reason to blame you. The oldest daughter moved out as soon as she turned 18. She enrolled in culinary school. There is something poetic about that. The girl who was forced to eat stolen cake as a child grew up to learn how to make her own. She will share them with people who deserve them. And somewhere, years from now, someone at a family dinner will bring up the wedding where the cake was stolen and the bride got her justice in the form of buttercream. Everyone will laugh, and the story will keep being told. Because some stories are too good to forget.